and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, published in 1989. And then the movie adaptation is directed by Wayne Wing and was released in 1993. And I have my first edition copy right here. Such a beautiful cover. But before I get into The Joy Luck Club, there's a couple things I wanted to address first. To begin with, this book won a poll I posted on YouTube, choosing between 4 different book versus movies, and The Joy Luck Club won. So definitely subscribe to my channel. I post polls like every other month or so that you guys can take part in choosing what I cover. So I'd love for you to subscribe, and I would love to get your vote on my next poll, which will be in January, I believe. And then also, this episode is my 100th book versus movie. So I have compared 100 books with 100 different movie adaptations. So that is so many book versus movie episodes, and I'm so surprised that I have reached 100 already. The first 40 of those was just as a podcast. Halfway through, I started doing YouTube as well. But yeah, that is 100 different book versus movie comparisons. So that's a lot, and it's so exciting. And I will be doing a Q&A next week to celebrate. So if you have any questions, you can comment on this video here. You can message me on Instagram. You can go to my community page where I have the Q&A post, and you can comment on that post with your question. You can email me at whythebookwins@gmail.com. So yeah, give me your questions. It can be about whatever, and I will answer them in my video next week. But moving on to the Joy Luck Club. So this is about 4 Chinese women and the relationships they have with their Chinese American daughters, as well as we see, what their life in China had been like. And with some of them, we see into the relationship with their own mothers as well. And Amy Tan's mother, Daisy, was from China, and they moved to Oakland, San Francisco area, which is the same as these characters in the book. And Amy Tan drew from her own experiences as a Chinese American, as well as from her mother's experiences in China. And so each of the 4 women and their daughters, parts of their story reflect Amy Tan and Daisy's own life. So I thought that was really interesting, and we will get into more of the specifics later on. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I had read part of it before. I didn't finish it. That was back in 2020. And I remember in 2020, I had a hard time following which daughter was whose, because we start with brief segments from all of the mothers, and then we switch to the daughter's perspective and get 4 different segments from their perspective, and then it ends with the mothers once again. And so, yeah, I remember getting to the daughter section being wait, which mother was hers, and what's the connection here? And so this time around I was prepared, and I made a chart, which I didn't bring it with me, but on paper I wrote down, the mother and what her experiences were, and which daughter was hers, and what the daughter's experiences. That way I could keep them all in line, and that helped a lot. But a complaint I did have with this book is that I felt like the characters didn't feel distinct enough. All of the daughters kind of felt the same, and then all of the mothers kind of felt the same as well. So I think that was partly why I had a hard time keeping them in order, because they all kind of blended, all of the mothers blended together, and then all of the daughters blended together for me. I will say we get one scene is all I can remember. One scene where 2 of the daughters, which it's different mothers, so the daughters are just friends, they're not sisters, where 2 of these friends are interacting with each other, and seeing them interact with each other helped me see the differences in their personality. But that happens so rarely in this book because it is focused on the mother-daughter relationship, not the relationship between these friends. And so when I got to see them interact with each other, it helped me be okay, now I'm getting a better picture of how they're different from each other. But again, that happens so rarely. And so yeah, a lot of them just kind of had the same sounding voice in my mind, and they weren't distinct enough. But despite those complaints, I did love this book. I thought it was really beautiful and really touching and really sad at times. And it is cool too that a book about Chinese women and their Chinese American daughters did so well, and this was such a hit, and the movie came very shortly after. And so that's just awesome, right? When you get someone other than white people as the focus. And on to the movie. I had seen this movie before. I watched it in 2008 with my sister, and there were 2 storylines I remembered really well and that have stuck with me through the years, but the rest of it I had totally forgotten, to be honest. But I really liked this movie, and I thought it was a very faithful adaptation. There are some changes to the Ying-Ying/Lena storyline, which we will get into. And also we have this going away party for June throughout the movie, which we return back to, and that was not in the book at all. But aside from that, it was very faithful. They do have a lot of voiceover in this movie, and I read that the director kind of defended the voiceover, being hey, we wanted to be as true to the book as we could, and in order to do that, we just needed to have a lot of narration. And I would have been fine with some narration, but it did seem to be a lot, and it goes back to show, don't tell, where so often they were telling us something, and it's you could have just shown it to us and not have had to have the voiceover. So I didn't hate it. It didn't ruin the movie for me by any means, but it was a bit much. But I thought the performances were fantastic. And with the movie, I didn't have any issue keeping the characters in line because you are seeing them on the screen. And so I never got confused who was connected to who, because the way the movie did it just made it very clear which daughter was whose and whose mother was whose. And now, before getting into the differences between book and movie, I want to warn you there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie for the rest of this episode. And I would highly recommend both of these. So if you want to go ahead and check out the book or a movie, go do that, and then come back and watch the rest of this episode. So I'm going to start with June and her mother Suyuan, which I'm going to try to pronounce these names correctly, but I apologize beforehand if I mispronounce it. But the book and movie begin with their story, and at the start we find out that June's mother Suyuan has died, and so it is her place to take her mother's spot at the Joy Luck Club where they play mahjong, and so she is taking her mother's corner. And while she is there, the three other women tell her that her mom had two daughters in China, which June was aware of, but they say that they have made contact with these two daughters and that June needs to go see them in place of her mother since her mother is no longer alive to be reconnected with these daughters. And June had been raised hearing the story about how her mom was leaving the town she was from, but then and she had two babies and she was carrying other stuff. But as she told the story, she said by the time she got to where she wanted to be, she had nothing left. And June would be like, wait, what? What about the babies? But the mom would never quite say what happened to the babies, just that she no longer had them by the time the journey came to an end. And near the end of the book, we find out that her mother had had severe dysentery and was just very sick. And in the book, she is pushing the babies in this cart, and her hands are all bloodied. But in the book, she had been carrying them in these things on her shoulder. So they were like a backpack or a baby carrier. I don't know what you call those. Anyway, so she'd had them there and it was just digging into her shoulders. And it got to a point where she just could no longer carry them or push them as it is in the movie. And so in the book, we learned that she put like a lot of jewelry that she'd had and money. She put them in the baby's blankets, and then she left a photo of herself. And on the back, she wrote a note just asking this person, whoever finds them, to please take care of them. And in the book, we get more specifics as to who found these two babies and what happened. Whereas in the movie, we don't really see that. We see that she has to leave them behind, and then she leaves, and that's that basically. Whereas in the book, we do get a bit more background information on the family that found them, and they cared for them and loved them and were great parents to them. But they also raised the daughters knowing that they had found them on the side of the road, and they had that picture that Suyuan had left with them, so they had that picture of their mother. But in the book, the three women tell June that when they wrote the daughters, they didn't tell the daughters that their mom had passed away. And so when June finds this out, she's like, wait, what? Like, I'm just supposed to show up and tell them that their mother actually died and I'm their sister and their mom isn't around to see them? Like, I can't be the one to tell them that. They're going to be so disappointed. And so one of the women writes to the daughters, letting them know, like, hey, Suyuan passed away, but her daughter June will be showing up instead, your half-sister. Whereas in the movie, the three women never tell the daughters that Suyuan died. So when June shows up, the daughters had been expecting their mother, but then it's June instead. And in both book and movie, it's a really sweet moment when she reconnects with her sisters. In the movie, they keep repeating the fact that June is their little sister, and then they hug, and like I said, it's a sweet moment. Whereas in the book, as they get together and hug, they just are repeating the word mom or mama and feeling like her presence is there with them as they are hugging. So I thought in the book it was even more poignant of a scene, but it was a great scene in the movie as well. But yeah, in the book, the daughters knew that the mom wasn't going to be showing up, whereas in the movie, they didn't. But in the book and movie, we also see how Suyuan had tried to get June to become a pianist and hoped she would be like a child prodigy, because Waverly, the daughter of Suyuan's friend, was a chess champion. And so Suyuan was jealous that her friend had this daughter who was a chess champion, so she wanted to get her daughter to be fantastic at something so that she could brag about her as well. However, June just was never motivated to play the piano, and she gets up at a recital and she just does terribly and she embarrasses herself and her mother. But it is a funny scene because her piano teacher had been deaf, and so even though she did terribly at the recital, in the book and movie it talks about how her piano teacher like stood up and gave her a standing ovation and was cheering her on because he couldn't actually hear it. And we learn in the book, too, more specifically, how June just seemed to kind of flounder in life and not really know what to do, and like she would never stick with things. And she does eventually become a copywriter, we learned that, but we also see more of her personality when we do a flashback where it is a Chinese New Year, the last Chinese New Year where her mom was still alive, and her mom had these 11 crabs, and one of them was missing a leg and wasn't as good. And in the book, we see this scene play out where June is the second to last person to choose her crab, and everybody who goes first, Waverly is one of them. Waverly chooses like the best crabs, and everybody's, it goes down the line, they pick whatever crab is best of the bunch, but when June gets it, she purposefully picks the bad crab, and her mom has to stop her and be like, wait, no, get the good crab, don't take the bad crab. And we don't see that whole scene play out in the movie, but we do see afterwards when they're in the kitchen, June talks to her mom being like, oh, you didn't eat that crab, because her mom ended up taking the bad crab with only one leg. And she says something about like, how did you know no one else would take the bad crab? Like, you just risked it? And she was like, because I know everybody else would have chosen the best. You were the only one who would have taken the bad crab. And so in the movie, she talks about how June has a good heart because she was the only one who would take the bad crab. It shows what a good heart she has. And I did think in the movie, we had more touching moments between mother and daughters where maybe things were said more directly in the movie between the mother and daughter, whereas in the book, like, I don't remember that line in the book specifically. She talks about how June is the only one who would have taken the bad crab, but in the movie it just ended up being a more touching scene between the two of them. But in both, she gives her this jade necklace, which June always feels like she's not sure what the jade necklace represents. But also at this dinner, another scene that happens is Waverly works for a law firm, I believe, and she kind of is like taking jabs at June, and so June in response is like, yeah, I mean, I'm a freelancer, and some people think that just means free work because someone's law firm hasn't paid me yet, because she did some freelance work for Waverly's company. And Waverly immediately gets awkward, and June is like, yeah, like, I got her now. But then it's revealed that Waverly hasn't paid her because her company found the work like unusable because it was just so bad. And so it ends up being such an embarrassing moment for June. She just feels worthless essentially, which again, that's another theme in this movie, is like knowing your worth. And so yeah, that just really hits her confidence. Again, that was a scene where I liked seeing the two friends interact with each other, and it helped me see more differences within their personalities and more distinct. But yeah, that again is in both in book and movie, where June is embarrassed by her bad copy work for Waverly's company. But on to Lindo and Waverly. So Lindo's story is that when she was young, her mother promised her to be married to this son of a wealthy family, and she was supposed to leave when she was 15, which in the movie, I think she does just leave when she's 15. But in the book, the family had to leave early, so then they have to give Lindo to this family when she is still very young. And she talks about how as soon as this was determined, when she still was with her family, her mother would no longer refer to her like by her name or like as her daughter. Instead, she would be like, oh, so-and-so's daughter-in-law like eats too much, or like, oh, look at so-and-so's future wife, or whatever. I can't remember the names, but she starts referring to her as if she already belongs to this other family. And she says in both book and movie how she knows her mother did that not because she didn't love Lindo, but because she needed to loosen that attachment she was feeling and not hope for something that she couldn't have. And in the movie, I thought we saw more between Lindo and her mom's relationship, and I think it showed more clearly how difficult it was for her mom to give her away. But yeah, so she moves to this house, and once she's 15, they get married, and her husband is very young, and so they end up not having sex at all, and he just has zero interest because he's just too young. But her mother-in-law is very upset because she's like, hey, you're supposed to be giving me grandchildren, like, where are my grandsons at? And so Lindo makes up this story eventually about how the ancestors visited her in a dream and like warned her that if she stayed with their son was going to die because this wasn't the right match, and that he's meant to be with this other servant girl who like secretly has royal blood basically, which is all a lie. She just knows this servant girl is already pregnant, and so she just lies to have the servant girl end up marrying the son instead. And also in the book, she saw this candle that's supposed to stay lit throughout the night when they were married, and it shows that they will have a prosperous marriage. And she knows that the candle went out and it had to be relit, but the matchmaker doesn't know she saw that, and so she brings that up as well, and the matchmaker confesses. And so the son's parents decide that they will have him married to the servant girl instead, and then she's already pregnant, and so it ends up being happily ever after, essentially. And yeah, and she eventually leaves and moves to San Francisco. And then Waverly, her daughter, at a young age becomes a chess champion, and she loves playing chess, and she knows that she has a talent. However, her mom is always bragging about her, and she walks around town with her, like just talking to anyone on the street that will listen about her daughter who's a chess champion, and Waverly gets embarrassed, and she's like, hey, stop bragging about me. If you want to brag, like, you become the chess champion. And so she ends up stopping playing chess because she's just mad at her mom. However, eventually she misses chess, and so she returns to her mom and is like, I'm ready to play again. But the mom is like, you think it's so easy, but it's not. And so her mom kind of got in her head. And when she tried to play chess again, she just didn't have the skill anymore. And she started to lose. And so then she just stopped once again and never played again. And so Waverly's thing is how she will feel confident in something, like with the man she's with or with her job or with chess. But then she says how her mom is able to like point something out and it gets in Waverly's head and it ruins things for her. Like her first husband, her mom pointed out this or that and she had loved him. But then as soon as her mom points something out, suddenly she falls out of love with him and is just too heavily influenced by her mom's words and thoughts, and she feels like her mom is just very judgmental. And Waverly starts dating this new guy named Rich, and when she has her mom meet him, she just feels like it goes terribly, and again, she's just feeling that doubt within herself because of her mom's judgment. However, the two of them have a good moment because eventually the parents, are accepting of Rich and they're going to get married and they're going to go on a honeymoon to China and they decide to have their mom come along with them. And in the movie, we also have a scene at the hairdresser, which they're at the hairdresser in both book and movie, but in the movie they're at the hairdresser and she talks about her mom being like, I feel like I can never do anything good enough and you're always judging me. And her mom is realizing how Waverly is misinterpreting her words in a sense. And so they have this really touching moment where they both cry and are more open with each other. And again, we had a scene, like I said, where they're at the hairdresser. And in the book as well, they decide to have their mom, Waverly decides to have her mom come with her and her husband to China, but it wasn't as like emotional and touching a scene in the book as it had been in the movie. And then on to An-Mei and Rose. So when An-Mei is very young, her mother is cast out of the family. And then years later, she returns when An-Mei's grandma is dying to show her respect to her mother. The daughter is still disowned by the family, so they don't like that she's there. But she stays to see her mom died and then dies, and then she's getting ready to leave. And An-Mei, she's like, I've already lost my mom once. I'm not going to lose her again. So she follows and goes with her mother. And we see that she is the fourth wife of this rich guy. And she sees that her mom is very unhappy in this life. And she hears from someone else about how she ended up there. And it's because, so An-Mei's dad had died. And so her mom was a widow. And then one day, this rich guy and his second wife, so he has his first wife, but she's like old and not really doing much. But his second wife is more conniving and sneaky. And so the second wife is with the husband and they see An-Mei's mom and she's very attractive. And so the second wife is like, okay, I got to get this lady for my husband. And so she tricks An-Mei's mom and has her come over for card games or to hang out or something. And then they get tired and because they're up late. So she's like, oh, just sleep here. It's fine. And then when she's asleep, she has the husband come in and then he rapes An-Mei's mom. But then after this event, no one believes that she was raped and they think that she was just sleeping around, I guess. And so she ends up having nowhere else to turn because she is disowned by everybody for something she didn't even consent to. And she has no choice but to just return to this home with this man and the second wife and become his fourth wife because no one else will take her and no one else trusts her. So it was just really sad how that mom got in that situation. And then the mom ends up committing suicide because she wants her daughter to live a better life. And so she commits suicide when there's a holiday coming up. And on this holiday, I guess they believe that spirits will return. And so at An-Mei's mom's funeral, An-Mei says how in 3 days, my mom's spirit is going to come back and she's going to make things right. And because they believe, strongly in the spirits of ancestors and things, they take this to heart and they really are worried about An-Mei's mom's spirit coming back and getting revenge on them for not treating her right. And so the man vows to raise An-Mei as if she were his own daughter and to respect An-Mei's mom as if she had been his first wife. Oh, also, by the way, An-Mei's mom gave birth to a son after An-Mei, but the second wife takes the son and acts like it's her own. And so that too, they decide to respect the fact that this son had not been second wife's, but it had been An-Mei's mom's. So that was definitely a sad story, but it showed the selflessness of the mom looking out for her daughter. And then An-Mei again eventually grows up and she also goes to San Francisco and she has her daughter Rose, and Rose ends up marrying this white guy. And throughout their relationship, this guy Ted, she just kind of let him make all the decisions. But then eventually he's a doctor and they start dating in college. But eventually when he's a doctor, a surgery goes wrong and it makes him lose his confidence because I don't remember if the patient died, but something happens that shakes his confidence. And so he wants her to make some of the decisions, but she still is just like, oh, you decide whatever you want. And so eventually he's tired of it and he's like, you know what, I want a divorce. And Rose is just more mild-mannered, and so she feels like she just has to go along with what Ted wants, and he wants to sell their house, and they both move out and go their separate ways. And her mom sees this, and her mom sees that Rose thinks she has no choice, but the mom is like, but Rose does have a choice. Like, she doesn't have to just sit by and let things happen. And in the book, Rose decides that she's going to keep this house. She wants to stay here. She doesn't want to move. And how when Ted shows up, like, she's going to tell him that. But then we never see her interact with her mom. As far as I remember, like, they never have a heart-to-heart. And then we never see how it goes with her husband, Ted. We just know that she wants to have him over and she's going to tell him that she wants to keep the house. But then that's it. And we don't find out how things turn out. And that is different from the movie, because in the movie, it's similar where Ted is the son of a very rich publisher guy, and so he's in the publishing industry. He's not a doctor. And at the start of their relationship, Rose is very assertive, and he likes that. However, as things go on, Rose values her love less, and she feels like Ted is worth so much more, and so she ends up becoming, like, shrinking herself, and again, allowing him to make all of the decisions while she just kind of stands by and sacrifices for him silently. And then again, eventually he's like, I want a divorce. And she is thinking like, this is just how it has to be. And he has this peanut butter pie he loves. So she's going to be making it for him when he comes over as they discuss selling the house. And the mom sees that she's going to make this. And she's like, if you don't value yourself, he's just going to continue taking you for granted. So like, stop, making this pie, being like, oh, like, here you go, like, kick me while I'm down kind of a thing. Like, and so the mom is like, you are worth more than this. And she tells her the story of her own mom who took her own life to help An-Mei. And so this story just really touches Rose. And so then when her husband shows up to the house so they can talk about it, she tells him like, I'm keeping this house. This house is mine. And she references the story about An-Mei and her mom. And Ted, rather than like being upset about this, like, he's touched and he wants to hear more, because this is the woman that he fell in love with, right? The woman who was assertive and who knew her love was worth just as much as Ted's. And so we see later at June's party that they stayed together and the relationship was saved. And this was one of the storylines that I had still remembered from when I watched this in 2008, because I just thought this was so powerful and so touching and such a great message as well. And also, by the way, in both book and movie, when Ted and Rose are first dating, he has him meet his parents. And in the book, the mom takes Rose aside and she's like, I think it's great you're dating Ted, but just so you know, things can't get serious because with his career field, he just can't be dating someone, because of the Vietnam War and everything. But then later, when they're on the drive home, she tells Ted that they need to break up, and he's taken aback and he's like, what? Why? And she tells him what his mom had said, and he's basically like, what, I don't care what my mom says, I love you, we're gonna do what we want. Whereas in the movie, it's a little different. Like, the same conversation happens between Rose and Ted's mom, but Ted comes up and he overhears and he tells his mom off to her face. But on to Ying-Ying and Lena now. So in the book and movie, Ying-Ying marries a man who is just very brash, and in the book, she is pregnant, and while she is pregnant, he ends up disappearing, and then he just never returns. And so she is just very depressed and upset about this, and she ends up aborting the baby and getting rid of it. And then she moves to the city and is working in the city for a while, and there's this white guy that will show up and is clearly interested in her, and he will give her gifts and things. But technically she's still married, and so eventually she gets a letter from someone telling her like, hey, your husband has officially died. And so at that point, the white guy proposes to her and she goes ahead and accepts, and then they go to San Francisco. Whereas in the movie, it's a little different. So she still marries the guy, and he's like a piece of trash and is flirting and sleeping around like crazy. And she gives birth to their son, and they're still married, and he's still like around, but he's like treating her poorly. He's abusing her and he's sleeping around. And so at one point she's bathing the baby, and she is just very depressed, obviously, because of how terrible this man is. And as she's bathing the baby, she like momentarily wants to have the baby die to get back at her husband, and so the baby ends up drowning. However, she quickly snaps out of it and is like shocked at what she's done, and she regrets it like right away. And so the regret of the death of that baby is something that haunts her throughout her life, which wasn't really the case in the book necessarily. But then moving back to the book, once she gives birth to Lena, after Lena, she is pregnant again, but then she has a miscarriage with that one, and she goes to the hospital, and then she's just in a depression a lot, partly due to things in China, but also because of this recent miscarriage she has. And Lena will hear the apartment next door and how they're always like being loud and arguing, but Lena is jealous of that. Even though they're arguing and things sound bad, she was like, I'd rather be in that than in this home where things are just so quiet and we just this house feels dead because of how quiet it is. Whereas in the movie, we see that Ying-Ying will go into these depressions, but it's insinuated in the movie that it is because of her past life in China and because of the death of that baby in China. And that's why she goes into these depressions now. And they leave out the miscarriage she had in adult life. But then Lena ends up marrying this guy named Harold, and when they were dating, they would split everything in half. And so when they get married, they do the same thing where they have this way of like keeping things even though he makes more money than her. Also, in the book, she encourages him to start his own company, and so he does. But then she goes with him to this company, and he becomes an associate, of course, because he's like one of the owners. But he's like, oh, but we can't like promote you that high because you're my wife and whatever. And so she's getting paid far less than he is in this company that she helped him start. But anyway, so they keep things very even with the way they pay things, and they have these lists about like, oh, you owe me money for this and I owe you money for that. And in the book and movie, they have ice cream on the list, meaning she owes him for ice cream that he bought. And in both book and movie, Lena doesn't like ice cream, and her mom points this out, being like, you shouldn't have to pay for his ice cream, like you don't eat ice cream. Which, by the way, in the book we learned that Lena had an eating disorder when she was younger, and that's why she doesn't like ice cream, is because she ate a ton of it and then threw it up. But anyway, so her mom points this out, and the mom can just see how unhappy Lena is. And so as her mom is at their house up in her room, she starts talking to Harold about it, being like, I don't like the way we do things, and I don't like what our marriage is based on. And then the mom is upstairs, and there's this vase on this rickety table Harold had made, and she purposefully has it fall so that Lena will come upstairs and she can talk to her. And in the book, that's where that story ends. Like, the mom talks about how Lena is going to come upstairs and they'll talk, but then that's it, and we don't hear what they talk about, and we don't know what happens. Whereas in the movie, Lena comes upstairs and she has this talk with her mom in the movie, and there's a great line in the movie where Lena tells her mom, she's like, I can't leave Harold. And the mom is like, it doesn't matter if you lose Harold. What matters is that you find yourself. And I just thought that was such a beautiful line. And again, this was another storyline that I had remembered from when I watched this like 15 years ago, because again, it was just very powerful. And I just love this overall theme of just knowing your worth and not valuing yourself lower than what you are, and prioritizing being true to yourself, And then we flash forward to June's farewell party, and we see Lena with this other guy, and they just have such a better relationship, and they're so much more happy and loose, and it was just a very sweet segment when we see the two of them, her and this new guy, together. But yeah, going back to the theme of just knowing your worth, I think the movie showed this even more so, because like I said, in the book, there were one-on-one interactions, of course, with the mothers and daughters, but in the movie, I thought they were just more impactful and more powerful, and really pushed home the message of knowing your value and knowing your worth. And I just really loved that. I will say Waverly, I guess, was maybe one who seemed the most confident and knew her worth. However, her problem was that she would just be influenced too heavily by what she thought her mom was implying, kind of a thing. And just like misinterpreting her mom too. Like there's a part where the mom is talking about where she's from, and it sounds like Taiwan. And so the daughter is like, oh yeah, something about her mom being from Taiwan. And the mom is like, what? No, I'm not from Taiwan. It's the name of a city in China that sounds like Taiwan. And how Waverly had felt like she and her mom were making a connection, but because she misinterpreted a word her mom said, like that connection feels lost. And so I thought that was interesting too. My parents are from America, their parents are from America, so I don't know what it's like to be raised in a different country than where your parents are from, in a different culture, on top of that, a different language. And so I thought that was a really interesting aspect of this book. But on to Amy Tan and her mother. So Tan's mother had 2 or 3 daughters that she had left in China. She also had a son, but he died. But so she had these daughters she had left in China. But then when Amy Tan was an adult, she and her mom went back to China, the both of them, to go meet these daughters. And so this experience is what inspired her to write the Joy Luck Club. In the book, June goes with her dad. He's there with her. But yeah, in real life, Amy Tan and her mother both went. But also Daisy's mother, so Amy Tan's grandmother, had committed suicide, so that's similar to the story with An-Mei. And then also Tan just had a very difficult relationship with her mother, and her mother seemed a bit unstable and would threaten suicide, and I guess she attempted suicide multiple times, but it never happened. And then she was also very upset with Amy Tan when she started dating a white guy, and women date white guys in the Joy Luck Club. None of the moms seem to have an issue with that one way or the other. But anyway, it seems like she had a very tumultuous relationship with her mom. And so I think it's interesting that in the book, there weren't any, like I said, the scenes between mother and daughters weren't as healing, it seemed, as it is in the movie. And so I wonder if Amy Tan didn't write any scenes like that because she had never experienced that kind of a situation with her own mom. Like they never had the healing maybe she would have wanted, and so she didn't write about it. I feel like I didn't say that very articulately, but I think you get what I mean. And yeah, when it comes to book versus movie, I actually think I would say the movie wins because I loved the book, but I just found the movie to be more emotional. And again, I never got the characters confused with each other. And I also loved the addition of June's farewell party because we got to see all of this big group interacting so much more because of this party that's going on. Whereas in the book, we hardly see all of them interact aside from the mother and daughters. But again, as I keep saying, the scenes between mother and daughters were so much more powerful in the movie. And I also liked that we saw how different situations turned out because in the book, there's a lot of relationships where we're like, we don't know how it turned out. Like, I guess it turned out good, but we don't know for sure. So I actually did like in the movie, showing us what happened with these relationships. But yeah, so that wraps it up for the Joy Luck Club. The movie wins here, but I would still recommend the book, and I did really like it. Which, by the way, I forgot to share this quote that I really liked, and this is when An-Mei is talking to Rose. Rose is the one who married Ted, the one where she was just always letting him make the decisions. And when her mom talks to her, she says, and this is in book and movie, I'm quoting the line from the movie, but there is a similar line in the book. An-Mei tells Rose, I tell you the story, meaning the story of her mom who committed suicide. She says, I tell you the story because I was raised the Chinese way. I was taught to desire nothing, to swallow other people's misery, and to eat my own bitterness. And even though I taught my daughter the opposite, she still came out the same way. Maybe it is because she was born to me and she was born a girl, and I was born to my mother and I was born a girl. All of us like stairs, one step after another, going up, going down, but always going the same way. No, this cannot be. This not knowing what you're worth, this didn't begin with you. My mother didn't know her worth until too late. Too late for her, but not for me. Now we will see. Is it not too late for you? And so I just thought that was a really beautiful line. But yeah, anyway, so that wraps it up for Joy Luck Club. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments what you think of this book and this movie. It is a very famous book. And the movie didn't get any awards. It was released in Oscar season, in September when a lot of contenders are released, and yet it wasn't nominated for anything, which seems odd because, people think of it as a chick flick, but it is so much more than a chick flick. So you should definitely watch it, whether you're a chick or not. And yeah, let me know your thoughts again down in the comments. Don't forget to give my podcast a rating and review, and I will see you next time. Bye.